back, and this is Crystal. We're with M40 Advocacy Media. We're here to record the Journey Series podcast. Today we have a special guest, originally from Australia by way of Texas and UK, all that. And we're here to talk to her about her new book and her journey with her son who has dyslexia. She's going to tell us more about all that stuff. Hi, Lois.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Crystal. It's so much fun to be joining you.
It's nice to see you again. Would you like to start, I guess, at the beginning and tell us about the early life of your son and what it was like raising him, and tell us about all that?
Yes, because my journey starts actually when I went to school, and I struggled my way through school. No one acknowledged that I struggled. I seemed to be doing okay, but I survived school because I could read words and couldn't comprehend, or my comprehension was compromised. And it took an enormous amount of effort for me to take in the information and spit it out. And with that, you don't look very smart. And no one acknowledged there was a problem or anything. She's just not very smart. And that's the default mechanism. The child is dumb. And then I had my children. My eldest learned at the speed of light. My second one, Nicholas, was the absolute opposite. And what I had not acknowledged nor understood at the time was that Nicholas had ear infections from the age 8 to 18 months. And that impacts the way the brain develops, and particularly impacts language. All the time he has this language problem, he's doing what he does well, and he's doing puzzles. And he will say, even today, I remember doing puzzles. It's one of my earliest memories. And he was doing puzzles before he was 2. That's his strength. But when he goes to school, he went to school in 1994 in Brisbane, Australia. He was aware there was a significant problem. He was afraid to go to school. And we sent him to school on day 1 with a stick insect that we'd found in the garden, put it in a little plastic box so he could take it to school, show his teacher, give him something to be comfortable. And I said, how did you get on at school today? And he just shook his head. The teacher had ignored him and left him behind. And, you know, day 1 at school is pretty tough, and children are doing all sorts of things. And Nicholas is quiet and would sit at the back, and he would just sit there and wait for the teacher to come to him. The teacher never came. And at the end of day 6, I go to the teacher and say, well, how's he getting on? And she just threw up her hands and said, well, you know, he's so slow. I don't know how I'm going to teach him. I don't know what I'm going to do this year with him. And how, in hindsight, I wish I had removed that child from grade 1 immediately. And I didn't. I sent him to school every day. He wet his pants, he bit his fingernails, and he stared into space. And the teacher then, what I didn't know was the teacher shouted at him every single day throughout that year. And some days must have been pretty bad because he would just come home and shrink. And one day he said to me, one morning, he said, will you take me into school, please, Mummy? And I had, you know, a 3-year-old on my hip, and it was up a hill. And I said, oh, can your brother take you? And I still feel guilty about that now, because he needed the support of an adult to go into that room with him. He was obviously so humiliated. The end of the year comes, and we had to do the testing, because that's the next thing you do. And the testing reveals he can read 10 words after 1 year in school. He's got no strength, and he's got a low IQ. And that's what they say to you. The prognosis when a child fails so dramatically is poor. They rarely get out of that hole that they are in. And we could have been in exactly that same position. except my husband's a professor. I married well. He's a professor, and we have study leave in the UK in the following year. And so I take Nicholas, and our family goes with him, and I take a series of books called Success for All, guaranteed to help these children learn to read and decode. It's got isolated words on a page. The child's meant to read them, get to the end of the page. We come back to the beginning, and Nicholas has lost it. No clue what he's read on the first one. No memory. And I am no better than the first grade teacher. My mother-in-law is with me, and she hears me getting frustrated with my dearest little boy. And she said, Lois, put away what's not working and make learning fun. Her words were transformative. And when you're in this hole, sometimes you need an outside voice to help you get out of the hole and just to reevaluate. And that's what she did. Okay, so I can put it away, but what am I going to replace it with? I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what can I do? And I thought about it, and I thought, Nicholas can rhyme words and he can see patterns. I'll write a little poem for him. So I wrote this simplest little poem with the words bug and mug and rug and lug. And then when we get ready to work the next day, I didn't ask him to read them. I read it to him. You can feel the tension in the room drop as he just enjoyed it. I read it, we read it together, and then we found the rhyming words, and then he and my mother-in-law illustrated it, with paper and 3Ds. And he was over the moon because that worked. I wrote a poem, another and another and another. And every day we were happy. He was laughing. We're enjoying it. And then 00 comes up because I've got, I'm just writing. 00 comes up as in the words Cook, Look and Book. And my thinking was, Captain James Cook, the last of the great explorers who actually completed the mapping of Australia way back in 1770. So I wrote this poem. There's Captain Cook had a notion. There's a gap in the map like a great big ocean. He took a look without the help of any book, hoping to find a quiet little nook. And see, it's a really simple poem that gives you the whole idea of what Cook did. He left England with a map of the world that was pretty simple. He would never have known about anything other than the surface of the water. He never knew what was underneath the water, which becomes significant as he travels up the east coast of Australia. And he mapped New Zealand. He mapped the 2 islands in New Zealand. So he's doing it without the help of any book. And when you use something that simple, there's a lot of discussion around it. So we're talking with this, and we're in this place called Oxford. Oxford, UK is, holds one of the world's greatest universities. And with any university, it comes with lots of resources. And we're seeing these resources in the city, and we're looking at maps, and we're discussing maps, and Nicholas is excited. And then as we do this, he says to me, who came before Captain Cook? And I said, that's easy, Nicholas. That was Christopher Columbus. And he says to me, and who came before Columbus? And I have no clue. I am shocked by his question. And it also said to me, this is a question that does not come from a child with a low IQ. And I needed to see his thinking and his strengths to believe him. And even though the question seemed simple, what I knew from Nicholas was that the amount of thinking that he was doing in his brain was huge to give out that one question. So I'm dealing with a strength-based approach unknown to me. I'm dealing with a strength-based approach of dealing with his strengths. And it was
Right.
exciting. And every time we're going into the city of Oxford, Nicholas is there just gobbling up everything. And that was just amazing to have this experience that was life-changing for him and for me. And now, instead of seeing a child who can't do anything, I'm seeing a child who's got this incredible thinking power.
Right.
While we are in Oxford, I met a lady who said, Lois, I've got some books for you. And the books were Hear It, See It, Say It, Do It, to help Nicholas learn to decode. That was transformative. But the order in which things happened was equally important, that I did the poetry first. Then I did the coding, because the poetry deals with the thinking and the rhyming and all of the little words. But it's the thinking that was critical. And then the decoding came second. And it was decoding at the rate that Nicholas could cope with it. And that was exciting. And I have the book, and it's right here. See, that's that one. Hear It, See It, Say It, Do It. And as you can see, you know, it's got lots of hands-on activities. And that's what I helped him do with the decoding. But the poetry and the decoding work together. We are in the UK for 6 months, and I've actually been teaching Nicholas for 4 months. 4 months changed his life. We returned to Australia, and I meet the diagnostician who had done the testing prior, 12 months prior, and I say, Nicholas has asked these amazing questions. She looks at me, she puts her hands on her hips, and she says, well, I've spoken to the reading teacher, and he's gone backwards. And in fact, he's the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching. And I'm gobsmacked. I go home, I think about it. I return to school and say, you can call him whatever you like, but if he is the worst child you've seen in 20 years of teaching, don't expect him to learn like everybody else.
Right.
And that became my mantra. But something else happened. That very afternoon, Nicholas comes home with sight words from his reading teacher. Nicholas has a classroom teacher and a reading teacher. The reading teacher he sees 30 minutes a day, one-on-one, 4 days a week. So you can expect, you know, that's really good teaching, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
So she sends him home with the sight word SAW, S-A-W. And 2 sentences with this one word. And one sentence is, I saw a cat climb up a tree. And the second is, I saw a man rob a bank. Nicholas comes to me with his little piece of paper, and he, you know, it's really hard to read these sentences, and he gets himself all ready and he takes a big breath. And then he goes, I saw a cat, he said. Then he goes, I was a cat. I had a cat, and I assert a cat, and he just hands me the paper. And when I do this with teachers, I say, what's going on? And I'm surprised at the responses I get, because it took me a while to work out. The teacher has only provided the abstract meaning of the word saw. She has failed to show him that the word saw is an object and means to cut and means to look. So when Nicholas read, I saw a cat, Nicholas either has an object there or he's cutting the cat, and he said, no, this doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And he knows I was never a cat. That was never on the cards, and the other 2 don't make any sense. The failure lies in the teaching. I sent him to school and I worked with him in an afternoon. And then eventually I got a bit tired of that, because Nicholas knew how hard it was to work after school, after being in school all day. And then one day I sent a lesson to the teacher, to the reading teacher. It was the best lesson I've ever done. And from there on, I knew that teaching reading involved more than just teaching of decoding. I went back to the classroom. I was a physical education teacher originally, and I went and became a reading specialist, and I upgraded. And it was when I'm doing the studies to become a reading specialist that I am just absorbed in the literature, loving it. And I read the one paper that I still have with me today. There's a number. I mean, all the papers were brilliant. And I spent hours in the library. This was pre-internet days, spent hours photocopying and reading articles. But the one paper that stuck me was written by an Australian professor called Beyond the Deficit Theory by Brian Campbell, Professor Brian Campbell. And in it, he says, when children fail to learn to read, the first thing we do is blame the child. We say, look at their home background, look at their IQ, look at this, look at that, look at the other. That's what I had experienced. And he said, when children fail to learn to read, it's because they have been given incomplete demonstrations of how words work. The word saw, I saw a cat climb up a tree, is an incomplete demonstration on how language works. After I read that paper, I was depressed for a week. I couldn't do anything because I couldn't believe I'm finding myself in academic literature and experiencing what he had written about in 1990. I have since found more papers. Professor Dudley Marling writes that learning and learning problems dwell in activities and cultural practices and not in the heads of individuals. Professor Mary Helen in More Than No Yang talks about the power and the importance of engaging emotions when we teach children, and particularly when we teach children to read. What did I do in Oxford? That I had worked with Nicholas. I had not only taught him about the history of the mapping of the world and decoding, but we had engaged his emotions. It takes till Nicholas is 30, and I ask him what happened in Oxford. And he says, I remember you wrote a poem about a witch's spell. And my kid, he's 30 years old, starts giggling. And he said, and it was so funny. It was so fun. I don't remember what it was about, but I just remember it was so funny for my 7-year-old brain. Here, we are 20 plus years, 25 plus years from when he had first learned this poem, and he's still giggling about it. How often do we do that when we're teaching children to read? Or are we just saying to children, you've got to learn this, you've got to get this right, instead of connecting with them, making learning meaningful? And now I've started on my soapbox.
Well, thank goodness that Nicholas had you there to be able to help him through that. I feel like a lot of teachers are caught in the middle of needing to fill a quota, maybe, and stuck in having to do the curriculum and being told that this is the steps you got to do, and if the child is not teachable the way you're taught to teach, then there's something wrong with them. No, some children do not learn the same. They might be brilliant in one area and faltering in another. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that they're really bright where other children might not be bright.
Yeah, and it also strikes me that if they've lost the ability to teach, that means they've probably also lost the love of learning themselves.
Or they've never had it.
Sorry?
Or they would never.
They never
Yeah.
had it. Because when I was working with Nicholas, you're right, we were so privileged, not only with the time, but where we were, the city of Oxford. If we had done this study anywhere else in the world, it would not have been the same. because Oxford has access to so many resources. And then there's the City of London. You know, it was an hour away, and we were seeing other things, all of it tied together to help Nicholas say, this is of value. And then we would write about it, that we had the flexibility. And what I'm doing with it was, when I'm working with Nicholas, I was not an expert in literacy. And I was also not an expert in the history of the world. Yes, I knew about Captain Cook. I knew about Christopher Columbus. Did I know about anyone else? Yes, I knew about Diaz. I knew about the guy who'd done the west coast of Australia, whose name escapes me. But we remember that. We'd done that, and Tasman. So I could plot a few points on the history of the world. But when I'm working with Nicholas, I am in the same position as him of learning something new. How did Columbus happen to stand up and say the world is round? How did he know that he could go from A to B? I then have to do the research so that I can help Nicholas.
I think another big piece of the puzzle too is that requires, like, that first grade teacher to just ignore her ego and just say, I have something to learn here.
100% right. Yes.
Because, yeah, so many disabled children, they have so much to teach other people, in being different and how they learn differently. And oftentimes those things are chastised and put aside. Oh, disgusting! You don't look right. You don't learn right. You don't do this right, that right. So let's just cast you aside. And that is so wrong, because as we're learning today, there's so many disabled people that have grown from it, with it, or acquired it, that are amazingly smart and have a lot of gifts to give.
I think on my website, I don't know if it's there any longer, I originally had MAPS as my acronym. MAPS. The first thing, the M stands for mindset. So that when we take children in front of us, if the first thing we say is that child can't read, or I can't teach that child, or that child's too slow, or too this or too that, that child will not learn to read. Because we have found that there's no way in the world I'm going to teach a child who I've said to is too slow. The way we think impacts the way we teach, and it impacts the child long term. And I'm privileged. I don't teach many children, but those that I do, I teach by adapting and changing the reading process. I don't do anything standardized, and I make the child the absolute center of my teaching. And that's what it's about. And then I'll give teachers a bonus. We don't give them the time or the resources to do what needs to be done to teach the kids who've been written off.
Well, exactly. It's not, I'm not, bashing teachers at all, because they're obviously a very big part of a child's life. But I'm just saying that when it comes to disability, they're not given the tools and the education to know how to deal with them, or that they can actually be different and how to accommodate them.
That absolutely right. So that was my journey in Australia. And it's interesting because in 1999, we had a bit of an upheaval. My husband wasn't particularly happy with his work. And so he'd been asked to apply for a job in Lubbock, Texas, which he did. He applied for, and then he eventually got. And so we are in this position. Are we going to move to Texas, or are we going to stay in Australia? Oh, huge decision. We did move, and we took Nicholas, age 11, with us, and our youngest son. The eldest stayed in Australia for another year or two. Nicholas goes to Lubbock to school, and he was in the middle of 5th grade in Australia. And we meet the principal of the school we're going to attend, and she says, I think Nicholas should repeat and go back into 4th grade. And this means Nicholas will be repeating for a second time, which is also not good, is it? You tend not to have children repeat more than once. But she's recommending repeating a second time. My husband's there, and he says, won't he be old when he graduates from high school? And she said, yes, that will be a problem. But, you know, we've got this program in middle school where he can do grades 7, 8, and 9 in 2 years. How about we do that? And that's what happened. So the school system became flexible. And in my book, Reversed a Memoir, I identify 9 factors that impacted Nicholas to help him go from the bottom of the class to the top, while in the 8 years that we were in Texas.
Wow.
And one was that he did repeat. He did go into 4th grade. The gap between his learning, because he's reading on a 3rd grade reading level, and he's now only in 4th grade, is reduced. He's learning more in the classroom. He does incredibly well with the mathematics. You know, he's happy with what he's doing. He's now the star of the school because he's this tall, blonde kid, and everyone flisses with his hair. And they want him to talk. They want to hear him talk. This kid has a language problem. If you've got a problem, how do you get better? You've got to address it. And because they wanted to hear him talk, he then had to think about things. And in this first class, they were actually doing tall tales. And one day Nicholas came home to me and said, Mum, you know, they've asked me, do we have koalas up every tree? And I said to him, Nicholas, of course we have koalas up every tree. And you ride a kangaroo to school. That's all Nicholas needed.
That's cute.
To start baiting the children. And one day the little children come up to me and a little bit horrified, and they said, how did you get to America from Australia? Did you really ride on the back of a whale? What had happened was Nicholas was now teasing them and coming up with all these scenarios of things that could possibly happen only in Australia.
Oh.
And so the world changed for him. He's no longer sitting at the back of the class being lost. He has a position in the school. And then he came home one day and he said, Mum, I've got to read a book and take a test. They were doing the AR program, Accelerator Reader Program.
Wow. Yeah.
We got to read a book and take it. At 7 o'clock at night, Nicholas goes to his room and starts reading. At 9 o'clock at night, I'm knocking on his door saying, Nicholas, it's time to go to bed. You've got school early tomorrow morning. He read for 2 hours a night, 5 and 6 and 7 nights a week, to read one Goosebump book. So he's taking over 5 minutes a page, 5 minutes to read one page of a Goosebumps book. You can see, you know, the work he's doing is huge. His growth is still at a snail's pace. So I start reading a page, he reads a page, you know, we do that. So that speeds us up. And then I speak to the librarian one day and say, you know, we've got to travel because we're driving places. And the boys fight. And she said, here, listen to these books on CD. Listening to the books on CD was transformative. If you've got a problem with language, how do you get better? You won't actually get better by just reading the book. You've got to be hearing the book at the rate of your peers. And we didn't listen to a book once. We would listen to it 3 or 4 or 5 times. Every time they're listening, the comprehension is increasing. Every time they're listening, the vocabulary is increasing. And the only time we had a problem in our car was when they didn't like the book. And it was just amazing to watch Nicholas grow over that whole period and every trip. And what do you do in Lubbock, Texas? You drive. You drive for hours. So you're listening to books on CD for hours on end, on end and on end. And the whole family is loving it. It's not a Nicholas problem. We're not listening to the book. We're listening because we love it. If we don't love it, switch it off and get another one.
Yeah. It's interesting how you can go from one environment to another, and the environment with the teachers, if they're casting you aside and saying you're not this, you're not that, those teachers are setting an example for the other children, saying, okay, if you see someone different and they're different, they look different, whatever, then you cast them aside and don't even talk to them, be mean to them and make fun of them, and that's really sad. But then when they're go to find themselves and go to a new environment, new city or whatever, it's interesting how new perspectives and new teachers help them accomplish things.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Because even in Australia, and that's why the move became so important, was all they saw was a slow child and a child who's behind. And irrespective of how much Nicholas worked, they were happy that he was reading 20 minutes a night, which is the standard, isn't it? If you read 20 minutes behind a night and you're behind, you'll never catch up. And when we went to Texas, you see this child who he's not doing it to be any better or any different to anyone. The teacher gave me a task, and this is what I have to do. And I'm enjoying the reading. That was the start. And then all of the other things like traveling became important, and listening to the books on CD. As I said, they were transformative. And another thing happened in Lubbock, and it happened to me, and that while I'm there, within the first months of being in Lubbock, I meet a mother whose 13-year-old son is non-reading. He spent 4 years in a phonics-only reading program, and the mother has taken him from school to this program for him to do an hour and a half of work and back to school every day. And he came out, couldn't read a sentence.
Yeah.
I said, with
Sorry,
Nick,
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
With the background of Nicholas, I said, I think I know what to do. So I started just to teach him on a weekend. My first lesson is really funny. And so that was important. But the mother said to me much later, the next lesson was the one that got him in. The next thing I did was I took a book, it's a series of short stories, and I took one story out of that and turned that book into a play for him. And he and his family and my boys, we acted it out one weekend. And she said, that's when you had him. That's when he knew it's going to be different with this lady. And we're not just doing decoding, but we're doing other things as well. I then taught him over the summer. At the end of the summer, the mother writes to the school district and said, you employ this woman or I sue you. I got employed. And I got employed to teach the children who, like this one, had failed numerous reading programs. So he was the first. The next two were 15 years old and they couldn't read 10 words between them. Lois, teach them to read. That's my task. And I did it. And if I can teach a child who's 15 to read, they could have been taught when they were 5 and 6.
Yeah, absolutely.
Am I passionate? Sorry. Yes.
I'm gonna bet that because of your own dyslexia struggles, that gave you more of an ambition to be able to help your son through his struggles, because you didn't want him to face the same stigma and the same things as you did. And then after that, those kids you're talking about now, so if only everybody thought that way and did those things.
And the other component is the place that academic literature plays in my life. You're right. I taught Nicholas, and that gave me a huge foundation for reading academic literature and reading academic papers. And so as I'm reading through the literature, I'm referring back to Nicholas. What worked? What didn't? What are they writing about here? And everything that I had read in the literature had occurred with Nicholas. So that was number one. And then the second is, like I said, the deficit theory. I cannot sit in front of my children and say, it's your fault that you have failed to learn to read. It's up to me, the teacher, to change the teaching so my students can learn to read. And that was my mantra. Change the teaching so they can. So that's what I do. And I still do it today.
That's great.
And when I look at Nicholas, eventually Nicholas does get a test that says he has a problem, and he is speech language impaired. He's 2nd percentile speech language impaired. That's 2 out of 100. It's pretty low. At the time, he was also reading and writing effectively. It shows when we do change the teaching, we change the outcomes for those students.
Yeah. A lot of the way the certain systems like education is, we've built this system, but in order for you to get any benefit, you have to jump through all these hoops that we've made up. And if you don't do it exactly how we want you to do it, then you're not a success.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. And the way we do it is by labeling. And that very label, 2nd percentile speech language impaired, the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching, low IQ, not one of those labels will help my child learn to read. In fact, they do the opposite. They will say he can't do it. And we have the data to back them up. And you as a parent, and I've had numerous discussions with parents, you as a parent only have anecdotal evidence to go on. My child is smart. My child can do amazing things. The school has the data, the hard facts of life.
The problem with those hard facts that are all written in books by these by whoever, some people higher up or whatever, writing these books and disseminating them to people with these rules, is that and all these scientific papers, they're not considering the entirety of a person. Whereas like a mother or other family that actually know the person, care, know that they're not just a diagnosis.
Absolutely right. Yes, you're absolutely right. This way that we have to jump through hoops to achieve what should be automatic. But the purpose of jumping through the hoops is actually not to teach the child. The purpose of jumping through hoops is to limit the amount of money we spend in a particular bucket.
That is so sad. you would think by now people would understand that everybody is different and everybody is going to learn differently and quit being so, hungry, what's, holding on their money. And, people are gonna learn differently, put money into whatever helps them. It's only going to advance society. It's only going to, further the economy as well. So I don't understand why they're so harsh on what they need to do to help you learn.
Which is kind of funny because if anyone knows anything about investment and finance, in order for you to achieve success, you have to diversify, right? If you put all your eggs in one basket and the basket falls, you've lost everything.
I still get astounded at my son's journey because so easily I could have fallen into the trap of believing the reading teacher if we had not had that time in Oxford. And he would never have achieved what he did because the teaching was standardized. The examples they gave were appalling, and they never once tried to adapt the teaching to meet his needs. And I feel for so many children who are left behind. Sorry.
Wouldn't you say, though, that the starting point of all this is really listening and caring? Because that's at the foundation. If you don't listen and don't care, you're not going to be able to teach.
The foundation today is, have we achieved our benchmark on the number of children that have passed exams? A standardized test.
Right, like I said, I was saying a quota.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Is her school at a certain level in the district? Then that's success, right?
And, when you look at the statistics on the number of children that are not reading effectively by the end of third grade, let alone 10th or 12th grade, it's a disaster. So something is going wrong, but we're not looking at it. We're not prepared to change, is what I am seeing. And I don't understand that.
You're right. So we've done a podcast in the past, where you were just discussing that we're not ready for change. We're not ready for, all these challenges with the people learning differently and these people, not acting the way we expect them to and things like that. Well, these kids are acting out because they're stressed because you're not teaching them in the way they're meant to be taught. So, well, in this podcast we talked about how schools and the world just not ready, or they don't want change, and that's really, really sad when we get to the level where people are accepting what's around them and what's, what kind of challenges people have, then a lot of things will be a lot better.
Some people don't get past mentally or emotionally, don't get past the level of high school. Everyone's got their little groups, and you've got your bullies and your cool kids, and all the disabled kids have to be pushed off to the side, and in order for you to be something, you have to put other people down.
Yes, exactly. Which to me, it's so hard that we are willing to leave our children behind. We are willing, and we want to limit the education money bucket, but we'll put it into prisons, and we'll do it for prisons for profit. rather than how are we going to support our children and our parents and our families who now face stresses that I think have never been faced before. But
And
both,
the irony is, sorry, the irony, I keep interrupting, sorry. The irony is, if we do all that good stuff, they probably won't even end up in prison.
that's
So
right.
then the question is, why do you want the prison to exist? The answer is because it's a business.
And education is the same. Big business
Yeah.
has had a big lot of money and a big bucket promoting programs that may work for some, but I can guarantee they will not work for all. Very scary stuff.
Yep.
You know, taking my story on, because it hasn't finished. The story has not finished, in that after Nicholas graduated with his PhD, I spoke to him and I said, Nicholas, tell me what happened in first grade. My son cried and not a word escaped from his mouth. And that's an awareness that trauma had happened in school by sending them to school every day. And we have since had counselling for him to deal with it. I started a podcast, When Learning is Trauma, that I've had to drop this year because of the enormous stress that he went under and then that I failed to help him deal with. So when children are struggling and children are crying going to school, we're actually traumatizing them and they will not learn a thing. What they're learning is that this place is not a good place for me. And that must stop. And when I went back to Nicholas and talked to him about first grade, I thought, I actually can't deal with it. I don't have the skills to deal with it. And then that's when I asked him, what did you learn when you and I learned together in 1995 in Oxford? And that's when I saw the transformation in him. And he's laughing. He remembered every poem that I had written for him and he named the poems. 25 years later, that learning was so deep that he named the poems. And then he started to laugh about this witch's spell poem, which I did not put into my book because I didn't think the poem was worthy of it. What I didn't know was how important the laughter was for him and how excited he was to write down all the ingredients, like, you know, a recipe. And he would just giggle and giggle and giggle, and it was so funny for him. I didn't know that that was so powerful. The other things I've learned. So when I work with students today, I go out of my way to meet their needs and to have a place where they feel comfortable. And for me to adjust the teaching. So when a child doesn't get something right, my thinking is, what's stopping them from remembering this word? What else do I have to do to help them understand this? And that's the way I approach literacy. It's rare. But, you know, that's where we're working from.
Yeah, it's definitely a different, maybe the teachers that, some of the teachers that are not so, they're kind of lackluster, unenthusiastic, they've had their own disappointing experiences with education and with life in general, and you know, then they're projecting that into the kids they're teaching. Definitely wrong, but I don't know that they're entirely to blame for it. It's just a system that perpetuates this.
That's right. They don't believe the child can learn to read, is one. They're not given the time and the effort it takes me to do this is not small. You know, I will work with a child for an hour, but there will be, particularly early on, an hour to an hour and a half of my time going in to get the resources put up for that child. And it varies depending on what they're doing, and I can pull from some, but a lot of it sometimes is, what does this child need in particular? What is going to engage them in literacy and learning? And I have all right here with me. Look, how about this? This book is written by Stanislaus Dehaney. Now, he is a literacy expert. And he's not talking on this book. He's not talking about literacy. He's talking about learning. And he says learning happens on 4 components. I'm going to change it to 5. And the first is we must have the child's attention. When I taught my first student in Lubbock, he had been in school every day, 5 days a week, and came out with nothing. Why? Because the reading program provided did not capture his attention. He was sitting in the class, repeating what they were asked to do, and he couldn't care less about it. So we've got to get their attention. The second we must do is have active learners. With Nicholas, I had active learner. He was an active learner when we were in Oxford. We were I was writing the poem, we were reading the poem, and then we were finding those things in the city around us. That was exciting. He was actively learning. My student, once I turned a book into a play, turning the book into a play means you can't read a sentence without acting it out and doing it. What does that mean? I've created active learners. So E, error correction. We've got to have, when kids make an error, we have to be able to say, does that make sense? Does that sound right to you? We've got to help them understand what's right, what they've got right, and what's missing to make sense of the text. And language is challenging, really challenging. And this is my extra one, E, emotions matter. And emotional engagement will give us far more than just sit down and read the text. I want you to engage in it. I want you to know that we can laugh and cry over it, and that we can work around this to make everything stick. So we've had active attention, active learners, error correction, emotion. And the last one is consolidation. And that's what he talks about in this book. The power and the importance of how we learn when it comes to literacy instruction. And you go to literacy websites, what are they on about? Structured literacy. No one is talking about engagement. Have I got the child's attention? Have we created active learners? Have we fixed up the errors that they've got? Have we engaged emotions? And have we considered consolidation? So that's my frustration with the world that we live in now, because that's my goal, is to have the child's attention and actively engaged in the learning before we can do anything else. And if we're not doing, if structured literacy is the only thing, if we haven't met the components of active learning and attention, we've wasted our time.
Right. When people forget the reason that they're doing what they do, and it's to help other people and encourage other people and
empower other.
yeah, empower them to be successful in something, or be able to do what they want to do, then that's when you know that you've lost your passion for what you're really about. Are you really wanting to be a leader? And but all you think about is how much power you now have and how much money you now have. Or is there really still a passion there, and you really want to help people, and you want to listen to people and teach them the way they need to be taught?
Absolutely right. Teach them the way they need to be taught, which is what it's all about to me. The cost of taking young children, and we're not talking about children who are 20 or 30 or adults, we're talking about children at the very beginning of their lives. We we have the ability to empower them or destroy them. And I keep going back to what happened if our family had not been so privileged. I could have believed the school, and that scares me enormously. You know, there's a video clip about my book that was done the day Nicholas graduated with his PhD, and there he is. He graduated with a PhD in applied mathematics from Oxford University. I mean, the journey has been extraordinary, unpredictable, unexpected. But we have to believe in our children. And I said the journey was unfinished. Yes, it still goes on as he faces probably, you know, challenges. Just because he has a PhD doesn't mean to say that everything is now easy for him. He faces different challenges now. Yeah. Yeah.
But he's probably figured out at this point how, like, the best way for him to learn.
Yes.
And a lot of it has to do with you helping him figure out who he is and how to accomplish that.
The bigger challenges are the world that we live in that how do you do interviews when you have a problem of hearing the information? Now it's got to go to my brain and I have to think, what is it saying? And now then, from what is it saying, I have to respond, and I have to respond in a way that says X, Y, and Z. Is hugely challenging for him. Yeah. And again, he goes back, the amount of effort my son puts in for an interview is astonishing. It's a struggle. So it's ongoing. The journey has not finished. He has an incredible wife who has made enormous differences to him in that she is so supportive. But it means you've got to find someone who's willing to put up with your challenges. And we don't always find that.
Yeah. It's like a lot of people sort of dismiss somebody with challenges or who is different, that something's wrong with you, you're not normal, and and then it's very hard for that person to try and get by because they have this feeling, this insecure feeling of not being valuable or whatever.
And it's very easy, even with a high degree, to still flop back into that feeling, I'm not of value or I can't do. So the journey is ongoing and unfinished. And it's a challenge for all of us. And my next book will be with my daughter-in-law about this topic. Because she faces it, you know, it's in her face day to day, the effort that Nicholas puts in and the stress that it adds to her and to her life.
Awesome.
So it's a challenge.
Will you please keep us updated on when you write that book and stuff?
I certainly will. It's a little way off. I've started writing it, but she's a far better writer than I am. She has to add a lot. At the moment, she doesn't have time. So, yeah. So, but my book is reversed to memoir. You know, and even as a dyslexic person, me writing that book was a huge effort. I worked with a writing coach to get a book that many people have said I couldn't put it down. And that's what I want from a story. I couldn't put it down. And I was able to do it from the beginning to the end. A lot of writing on my part. And so, yeah, so that's what I've done. That's what I've achieved. I've spent the last, 5 years trying to do this, and to get it out was fantastic, to complete it. And now I'm teaching again, which I just absolutely love. Taking on children who struggle with all reading programs, understanding there's more work than just teaching decoding.
That was awesome. You did great.
So Lois, if there's parents struggling out there with maybe children with learning disabilities or children with problems in school, how can they reach out to you?
They can reach me at through my website at loisletchford.com. You can email me at lois@loisletchford.com. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram. And
All the things.
yeah, all of those things. And I just love teaching kids to read. It's the delight of my life to be able to watch children who can't come to you and to see them smile and think, yeah, this is okay. This is going to be okay. And then they read. Then they read independently, and then they fly.
And that's amazing because that sets them up for like knowing so many things and being able to accomplish so many things when you can read what you see.
That's right. You can read and then we can write. It's all so powerful and so important. And, you know, I told my story because the prognosis for Nicholas when he was 6.5 years old was utterly dire. And it's so easy to fall into the trap of accepting that or believing that, as opposed to what else do I have to do and what else can I do? And not, like you've kept saying, you know, that the way into the system is not very healthy.
Yeah. And the thing is, it has benefits for everyone, benefits for the teacher, right? Benefits for the student in feeling valued and actually learning rather than being pushed aside. And eventually, if that support is there all the time or as needed, the benefits to society as a whole. Right.
Totally agree with you. Absolutely agree. It's for a benefit of a society as a whole. And that's why we should be doing it. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Crystal. This has been a phenomenal interview.
Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. It was really amazing.
Thank you.
Well, I hope we got the lighting all right and the sound right.
We'll get it. To where it's fine.
But thanks again for joining us today. And we'll have to do this again sometime, Lois.
That's lovely. Well, I'm delighted to talk to you, and I'm glad we got the time sorted out because I didn't know. I'm dyslexic. I make a mess.
Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.